Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about bidding strategy. This is part of a project management series that we're doing. So what are the various strategies to scope and price projects and how to enable a project to manage and protect from scope creep? We're all scared of that. So we'll be talking a little bit about that in the second hour. So if you've got questions about bidding in scope creep and how to avoid it, it feels like that should be a commercial somewhere, like how to avoid now available for scope creep. So throw those questions in. And if you've got questions for the first hour, of course, you can use this little QR code here. You have it's askofficehours.com. And you can go ahead and ask those. And you can ask those 24/7. So that those go into a little box that isn't limited by the fact that we're resetting our show every day. So if you have a question at any given time, you can actually do that. So you can go to askofficehours.com, throw your question in, and then we'll feed them into the system the next day. So stay tuned for that. Also, a reminder that there is a radio app that's out there. And if you get it in Discord, it's under the Alex announcements. You can actually go straight to asking questions there as well. So let's check. Make sure to check that out. All right, let's go to the questions, Jeffrey.
All right, we're going to start over the pond. Graham Cardwell at Belfast, Northern Ireland. He's going, I made a video for church, sent it by wetransfer, and when it played out, it developed a click that's not in the original. Any suggestions on how to fix it?
Go ahead, Jesse.
I don't think your problem is happening at export or wetransfer. If it's happening at export, you can check the file on your own computer, and if you're hearing that click, then you know it's happening at export. WeTransfer shouldn't be adding any clicks into your audio. The first thing I would check is the connection between the playout device and the broadcast device, and make sure that those two are running at the same frequency for audio. So it could be that your playout device is feeding 44.1 into a device that's expecting 48 or something like that. And linking those up, matching those might help fix the click.
Yeah, clicks are oftentimes connected to, there's clocking issues somewhere. So when you hear clicks, oftentimes you want to look at if you've got various clocks that are in there. Next question.
Next question comes from John Preto from Las Vegas, and he basically says, so let's discuss the Sphere experience. Mr. Fenwick, roll video.
I don't have a video, John. You can't just call this.
I told you before the show.
I know, but then I asked you where it was. Never mind. I don't have a video. So there's tons of videos. There's a million videos of YouTube playing. Most of them people with their iPhones.
Go ahead, John.
So Alex said it months ago. The venue is overshadowing the band completely. It's really interesting because there's this shot and the band looks about an inch tall.
Well, because they are an inch tall.
And
they're not.
Have you seen the videos, Alex?
I saw the videos. They're exactly what all the bands are worried about. It's not. You don't really need the band to be there. I think that's the challenge. Now, as an experience of, as experiencing, something there, I think it's an incredible venue. I'm not sure if they made the sale yet that the band should go there. I mean, I think that the problem is, I guess, what we haven't seen a lot of is any kind of, virtual iMag that might go up there that shows the band there, which would probably make it. But we have to remember that when you go to a Taylor Swift concert or a whatever, the band is probably smaller. The artist is probably smaller than what you see there. I mean, we see a lot of videos of these artists from someone that's, 4 rows back or 40 rows back, but we don't see what it looks like when they are, back in the, section CJ 188 CCC. They're a lot smaller back there.
I've had that seat. It's awful.
That was the last stadium show I saw was, I think, in 1997, and it was U2. And I was in one of those seats. It was free. It was like someone had some extra seats, and we went and watched U2. And I was like, I don't even know why I'm here. And that's the last concert that I've seen in a stadium. And go ahead, Chris.
You can tell the people that aren't U2 fans because they say U2. So here's my take on it. I think that what we have been experiencing for the last 30 or 40 years is a matter of scale. and its proportions. So like, yes, the talent are small, and if you're in a stadium, right, you're definitely looking at iMac. I find it interesting when sometimes when you look at people's like cell phone videos from a concert, what they tend to shoot mostly is the iMac screen. You know, like, oh, look, there's, you know, Bono, blah, but they're shooting the screen. And so, but it also has to do with distance. So the thing about the Sphere, all the video that I've seen, and again, I haven't been in the ball, but it seems super claustrophobic. Like the screen is like really pushing back on me. And I'd love to know what the delivery specs are for making stuff for that screen. I've made a lot of videos for very large screens, not that big, obviously. It would be, I don't think they've figured out how to use the screen. Like, how do you use this screen? I thought it was interesting. They did a few looks. One of the things was like this cross look where they split, they like animated like a crack in the Sphere and then a horizontal crack. And then they lined it with like 16:9-ish or even 3:4 video representations of what's going on. They did a few vistas. The vistas were pretty spectacular. But now I'm just watching a vista of the desert while I listen to a bunch of U2 music. And the band are these little tiny, you know, dots at the bottom of the screen. So and then take this into consideration. Bono's 62, 63 years old. I don't want my 60-year-old face that big in front of people where they're sitting that close. I'm going to look like hell, right? That's not pretty. Nobody wants to look at that. Like, nobody wants to look at that. And so you don't want to fill the screen with faces and stuff. So I don't think they've figured out how to use the screen effectively for a rock and roll show.
I mean, what I think was in some of the trade magazines was they were having a hard time getting bands to want to play there because they thought they'd be swallowed up by the screen. And I think they got U2 to do it because they paid them a lot of money. You know, and U2 oftentimes will, you know, they always want to be on the front edge of a lot of things. So they, you know, there's a lot of, if you're looking for a relatively large band that will make an experiment. I did a stream with them a couple of years ago, and they, you know, it was a very experimental thing. It was only up there it was a new music video, and it was exclusive, and it was only there for a minute. Like it was there for the day or whatever, that you could watch it. And that's the kind of thing that they like to do, is do something crazy that's going to stretch the environment out. It was a remarkably complicated show to do for a moment, you know, and but U2 tends to go down that path. You know, so I think they picked the right band to experiment with, but I think that they haven't proven that they've gotten past what everyone's afraid of. But the function is they have a band that's willing to experiment, and they're paying them enough to be patient, and they now have a band that they can play with. You know, they can play with the idea, you know, and see what actually is going to. There's nothing better than doing something, you know, to figure it out. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
One last little thing. The third sort of style look that they're doing is full 3D rendered madness, you know, and that I think is interesting, but it's also not really rock and roll. It's just it's the B-roll for the music video. And so I still go back to, I don't think they've figured out how to use that screen.
But I guess what I will say, in all fairness, the only way they're going to figure it out is by doing it. You know, like
you got to do a lot of it. Yes,
you got to do a lot of it. And you can sit there and play with the screen and watch it and do things, but you don't know until 17,000 people are in seats and you're doing things to see what they react to, what they don't react to, how they interact. You know, there's just, and I think that this is the beginning. I think 4 or 5 years from now, I think they could do really well. I think it's going to be a great venue to go see stuff in. I don't know if it's great for the band. I do think that I think in 4 or 5 years they're going to have this pretty well figured out. I think there'll probably be 3 or 4 of these, and I just don't know if the ROI is going to be there anytime soon. But it looks pretty amazing. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I was going to say what the first people saw and what the people at the end of that residency see, I suspect, will be completely different because they will iterate through it. We went to see Depeche Mode, I know, Child of the 80s, last week. So about 12,000 people. So there's a huge jump from 12,000 to stadium or even bigger. And the scale is really dramatic. And, you know, at the sort of arena size, the artist can still be fairly in the middle of the action, you know. The one place I've seen it done really interesting is the ABBA Voyage thing in London, which is, they're not 3D avatars, but you get the idea of it. And that, to me, for the first time, sort of broke the point. They had a live band, they had them on video aged appropriately to when they were making hits. And when they were on the big screen, that looked great. And I wonder whether there's some mix there that they should look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I've heard from the ABBA thing, I haven't been to it yet, is that, you know, the lighting effects and everything else really, you know, tied in. And outside of a handful of places that feel like a music video, you just get kind of like even the video parts that aren't someone on stage actually takes you out of it in a way that, you know, it suddenly becomes a video screen, which is something I've been tracking I work on a lot of concerts, so I've been tracking like what breaks that feeling that you're there. And it sounds like the only thing the ABBA one that people talked about was the fact that there was some places that didn't feel like, it felt like a music video, not them on stage, and they would have preferred it to just be them on stage. The conceit of what they were trying to do was maintained until they broke it, you know, and that was an interesting puzzle there. Go ahead, CJ.
I'm a big concert fan. I think I've been to 150 or 200 shows. I'm actually going to see the show at the Sphere 2 weeks from Wednesday, so I can file a report. But I'm most interested to see what are the lighting designers going to do in a space that's so dominated by a video screen. I'm like, when I was at the Billy Joel Stevie Nicks show at Lincoln Financial, and what they do to create a space is just so amazing. You wonder, like, how much does this change with the, like, I'm excited to see them stumble, I guess. I'm excited to see, like, what's their first take on this.
Well, and it's hard, you know, the show that, I mean, so all of that stuff for most of these large concerts are all figured out in a big warehouse in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. so there's, or just north of Lancaster. And so they're, you know, so at Rock Lidditz, they have these stages that they plan all those systems out. They don't change much once they get on tour because it's just, you know, nothing evolves once it's on tour, but it evolves a lot while it's in the warehouse. The hard part is you can't do that in the Sphere because there's nowhere to simulate it. So that they have to they've done as much as they could do. It's pencils down. Now you have to do it in front of people and keep on evolving. Go ahead, Chris.
I think the last thing I want to say that I like about a live show is the stuff that isn't rehearsed, that stuff that breaks. When things go belly up, you get to really see what a live band can do. I mean, if you want to talk about a great U2 moment, it would be the Live Aid performance that they did where there was a girl getting crushed in the front row and Bono climbed 20 feet down off the stage to help to get the security guys to pull her up. And they took, I think it was Bad that they started playing, and they stretched it to their whole 15-minute set. They did one song instead of three because Bono went off the rails. And you could see what a band could really do. And I think when things are too rehearsed and too perfect, it's like, meh, it's going to be fine because they rehearsed it a million times, and I don't care.
Yeah, I think
I want to see things go weird.
I think that the things that I've been to a couple of shows. It's been my job for on and off for a couple decades, and I almost never go as a participant, but I look at what those moments are, and I think that Foo Fighters they do a pretty good job of pulling people out of, you know, I don't know how organized or unorganized it is when they pull people up, but having just random people come up and play a song with them is a lot of fun, you know, and I think it creates these moments that that isn't just hearing their songs on a click track that they're all playing to. I think to your point. I also think that the audience interaction, the bands that get really good at audience interaction, are the ones that are singing with the audience, allow the audience to sing, with them, as opposed to them just singing to the audience. I think the bands that get really good at that, if you ever go to I've been to a couple Billy Bragg shows. He is a master. Like, he will sit there and have for the songs that he knows, that everybody knows, he'll sit there and just go back and forth with the audience, and it's really, then there's a reason that you were there. His audiences aren't huge, so you'll get I've never seen him in front of more than a couple thousand people, but his audiences are just this, he just goes back and forth, and it's really it's an amazing experience for the folks that are there, because you really feel like you're part of the show, like fans feel like they're part of a football game or something like that. Next question.
Next question comes from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. Is there a list of sub $150 27-inch monitors that can display 29.9 frames per second video feeds from switchers?
What I would recommend is thinking about having a some kind of converter that would do that for you. So I would use an MDHX. That's gonna run your price up though. There's not that many that I know of that do 2997 specifically. So a lot of them are still end up back at 30. And then the other question I have for you is what you're doing with the 2997. so it would be really interesting to put in a request for it would make sense for Blackmagic on their switchers to output 30, because run a show at 2997, because they've got all the Teranex stuff. Having the output be able to be 30 frames, and I haven't even looked at the switcher as to whether you can set the output frame rate to a whole frame. But that would be an interesting puzzle, is to be able to, because I think that they would be able, to do that. But I don't know if maybe the Lilliput's would do those outputs at 2997. I've never seen a time when we plugged a Lilliput into anything and it didn't work. It's not a particularly expensive one. It's not. I don't know if they make any 27 inches. Most of those are, when you get to 27 inch. You are getting to generally computer monitors or very small TVs. It's generally computer monitors. That's why they're expecting whole frames, is they're not expecting to get anything other than whole frames, because the computer monitors go up until about, I think, the 32 inch. 32 inches really thinks it's a TV. At that point, you may be able to find ones that are supporting it about 32. 27 up to 32 it thinks it's a monitor. It's not expecting video. Next question.
Next up comes from Thomas Jenkins in Clarksville. He goes, has anyone tried color correcting ProRes Log with iMovie on Mac? Where do you get LUTs? Apple released an update to support the new features, but I cannot find anything on how to use it.
Jesse?
I haven't worked in iMovie in quite some time, so I'm going to focus on where to get LUTs. The first place you can look is online for free LUT packs or paid LUT packs. The trick with these is don't apply them at 100%. Ease off the global blend when you're using LUT packs that you download from the internet. You can also build some in DaVinci Resolve, and someone on the panel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you can export your LUTs even in the free version of Resolve. So if you want to jump in and start playing around with that, you can. I would recommend exporting at 33 points instead of 65, because 33 is just more compatible across more devices, more LUT input, more LUT load in software. And finally, check your camera. If you're shooting on a Sony, they include the LUTs that you will need in the file tree folders, folder tree files. You just have to find that LUT and bring it into your NLE.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure what we were going to do, but this question has definitely pushed me over. For Thursday, we had a cancellation, so we had to move things around. And Thursday, we'll talk about the iPhone. So I was trying to avoid doing another Apple-based thing, yet another one, but I think that we'll go ahead and do the iPhone because it just came out, and a couple of us have the cameras, and it's worth talking about this conversion and log and all the different things that you can do with the cameras that are there. So we'll put that into the emails that go out. That'll go out tomorrow. So the way I just did this last night, I think there was a question about this earlier. I said, ask again on Monday. So I took my footage that I shot. So I shot some log footage of my kids' recital, at school, and at like 10x. So it was a little soft, but it was still I was really far away, and I got just a one up of my kids playing. What I needed to do to make that work was to set it to your color space, your input color space. So I did it in Resolve. So I did it in Final Cut. Final Cut will automatically see it and just want to do Apple Log or whatever, and so it works. It looks okay in Final Cut. The automatic Final Cut version of it was okay. Not great. So what I did is I took it into Resolve, and I set it to Rec 2020, the input color space to Rec 2020, and then there is an Apple log. There's now an Apple log in the Gamma. So I did Apple log, so Rec 2020 Apple log, and then I went Rec 709A, Rec 709A, and it came out looking pretty good. And then I added a node to it to increase the contrast a little bit and move the Gamma back and forth a little bit to correct it. I'm sure that it could be done better. I did that all in about 10 minutes. So it's there, but it is now if you've updated Final Cut, you'll see a Apple log capability there. Again, the tools in Final Cut to do the final color correction are a little bit more crude compared to Resolve. So I spent a little time there to see if it worked. I didn't try it in iMovie, but we'll take a look at that. But we'll talk about that more on Thursday. We'll bring some more clips in and play with it. It does take an amazing amount of a 3-minute clip was 21 gigs. On my phone, it's kind of an incredible. And when you go to record it and you set it to 4K 60, you get this little error message on your phone that says you need an external drive to record 4K 60 on your iPhone, which I thought was kind of the most amazing message ever. That we can now, not only does it support a drive going out of your phone, but it requires you to have one if you want to record at that level. It truly has become a real production camera, which is why we'll talk about it on Thursday. Next question.
Next up is Douglas Carmichael. He goes, according to discussions on Reddit, the MSG Sphere uses LAWO, LAWO Power Core
LAWO.
Routing. Is it LAWO? Okay.
It's a W, but it's a B.
It's okay, LAWO. Okay. So MSG Sphere uses LAWO Power Core routing engines to accept up to 128 Dante channels to steer within the venue. How would a traveling production conceivably interface their Dante network with the Sphere?
There won't be any traveling productions that go into the Sphere. These are all going to be residencies. So there's no way that a traveling production can tie into the Sphere. There is a way. I just don't think no one's going to spend the money that it's required to make the Sphere work with a band that's coming in with a generalized system to integrate it. It's always going to be a residency because it just takes too much setup time. It takes, to tune because you have to make an entire experience for the screen. For every one of these, my guess is it's somewhere between 3 and 6 months of planning, from the previs to the, all the other things, just to have a band come in. So, I think U2 is I think they're there for 3 or 4 months at least. So I think that's, but that's what you're going to see is that to get the ROI out of it, they'll have to plan it and have that band there for a long time. So I don't think that would happen. Next question.
Next up is Brian Shan from Sydney, Australia. He goes, AES and NAB New York is less than a month away. What's the panel hoping to see?
Does anyone have any specific hopes that the things that they want to look at? We're going to have a table there. So we actually have a 20 by 10 space and a table there, courtesy of NAB. So thank you very much to NAB there. So we'll be covering both of those. We're going to have a little bit of a table. We should have 2 live views that are roaming around as well. So we should, we expect to have longer coverage because we have more footprint to it. And we're going to try to cover that. So we will be taking over Wednesday and Thursday of that week for the office hours at 7:00 to cover NAB, and then we'll probably extend past that start time to cover some more things there. But if you do have interest, let us know. You can. I think there's a discussion in Discord, but do let us know what you'd like to see as we do the final planning for the layout. Next question.
Craig Kadoki from Toronto is asking for a follow-up for a Saturday question about QT recording. In high quality, all inputs from a multi-channel audio I/O get summed to mono on channel 3 in a 7.1 file. In max quality, it records all channels independently. Using a DiGiCo USB interface gives me a video with 48 audio tracks.
The reason it's summing them all into channel 3 in a 7.1 file is because it thinks that channel 3 is the center channel. So it is if for whatever reason, I don't know why it's saying, oh, you want mono. It may, if you're compressing it, in all high. but what it's doing for whatever reason is it's deciding that you want mono, and I don't know why it's deciding that, but mono would be if it went down to one channel, it's going to put it in any kind of surround file, 5.1, 7.1, 7.14, 9.16, whatever that is. It's going to grab onto channel 3 and put it there because it's the center channel. Oh, by the way, funny thing about watching football on YouTube now is the commercials are in stereo, but the whole game is in 5.1, or at least the games I was watching. And you'll notice that the speakers change. I mean, if you have a 5.1 system or a 7.1 system, that the commercials are all coming with a phantom center, and the games come in down the actual center. I thought it was interesting. It took me a little while. I felt like I was getting disoriented by the commercials until I realized what was happening. Next question.
Next up is Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. He goes, I used a MacBook Pro and a Windows PC over an ATEM Mini Pro. There was a constant flickering on the projection when the Mac was on. The PC was stable. It was a little better when used with the USB-C to HDMI adapter instead of the built-in interface.
And I'm not sure what the built-in interface means there. So, maybe the built-in HDMI to HDMI. Flickering, I think that the flickering is that the Mac, for some reason, isn't doing 25 frames a second. If you're in Germany, the Mac may be going to 30 instead of 25. So I would take a look at whether you're doing, whether you're on a, I think that would be the thing that I would look for, is look at your frame rate and make sure that your frame rate's locked. It may not be locking it correctly. It should negotiate between the switcher, where it goes, what do you want, in that area, and the switcher should tell it what it wants, and then it, that handshake should happen there, but it may not be. So you may want to look at your computer and make sure that your computer is set to the 25 output. I will say that I've noticed that if when I restart my ATEM switcher with that little gray bug or whatever, I lose a bunch of my inputs from some of my computers. Mostly just my studio will drop out the screen that goes into the switcher, and I have to unplug it and plug it back in again. So it could be I would definitely try to unplug and plug in your cable to see if that makes any difference, because it'll cause it to renegotiate. Go, Jeffrey.
Jonas is chiming in on this over on the chat. He goes, this sadly is a typical issue seen with the Macs. Don't know resolution, but it's just it's not just you.
It might be something that's more of a European thing too, but again, in this 25 or 30 frame per second cadence, because it's not something that I have ever seen here. And I have 5 Macs plugged into my switcher right now. So I don't know. I don't know what would cause it. I've never seen a flicker from the Mac at all. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm also wondering which port that it's plugged into. If it's plugged into HDMI 1 on a ATEM that's game mode, and so there might not be any scaling going on. So try switching it over to number 2, 3, or 4. Those all have Teranex scalers on them, and then see if it used to be called Res X, was a app that let you get these off kilter resolutions. There's a new one. It's not super stable, but there is one in the App Store that's meant for Sonoma that you can try, or Catalina, or one of these other operating systems, and get the right sync so it handshakes correctly.
Yeah, and I never let it. I know it's set there, but you can hard set the frame rate for the switcher as well. So always remember that as well. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
The other thing I was going to say is, for a MacBook Pro, the default screen is not 16:9, it's 16:10. So maybe there's some sort of resolution wonkiness going on as it's trying to change it down to 16:9.
Yeah, I mean, generally the Mac does a pretty good job of that, where if it sees a 1080p screen, it just gives you 1080p at this point. So, I don't know, because all of my screens are 16:9 1080p, and it doesn't seem to have any problem. And again, it doesn't have a problem with my switcher either. So it may be some kind of cadence with but I would definitely, I do think that Guy might be onto something with the input 1. You have to be kind of careful about what you put into input 1. It's a little, if you allow the switcher to be defining it based on that input, I go in there and just set it, like this is what I want. which is another setting that you have there on the ATEM. Quick reminder that you can, of course, ask questions throughout the hours. So if you've got questions, you can either throw them in for the first or second hour. We'll keep track of it. Just let us know if it's a second hour if you're typing it in. But you can go ahead and throw those questions in via askofficehours.com, or you can use that little QR code there. You can also go ahead and use it in Makana, of course, and make sure to vote on those questions so that we know what order you'd like us to ask them in. Next question.
Next up is Jeff Cohen from Miami Beach, and he goes, anyone try the new macOS Presenter overlay feature? Is it a virtual camera to zoom, or does it only affect whatever you're screen sharing?
Well, there is a virtual camera that's there, so I don't know if that's the one that you're looking at there. But there's Apple now has a camera in Sonoma it'll just handshake as a camera, and then you have a lot of things that you can do with it within there. Because I'm probably not going to be using Sonoma anytime soon, I think that on my main computer that's here, I may do it. I have a Zoom machine that I'm kind of configuring. Maybe I'll put it on there so I can try it out, but it usually takes me a little longer to test any of the Mac OS stuff. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, you have to be sharing something to make it work. So you can't turn it on any other way. And most of us bring whatever we're sharing in from another machine using our ATEM. So I don't tend to use it, but it's in sharing. You do have to be careful of the hand signals. I've lots of people who got confused because I did that to someone the other day, and a box appeared like it did there, and that threw them. So be careful of that.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I don't know why those things don't work for me. By the way, I've put Sonoma on everything, even my main edit machine. I'm in the middle of a opening video that's 400 pixels by whatever. No fears, did it, got it over with, moving forward. Welcome to the future.
I did that last year, and I paid a pretty heavy price for it. So I'm not going to probably do that again. Next question.
Next question comes from Eric Hers from Hartford, Connecticut. FAST and AVOD are growing rapidly, but can anyone, even Apple, compete against Google and Amazon's streaming distribution cost advantage?
Well, I don't think that I don't think that Apple needs to compete with them. I mean, I think they are providing as far as the, I think that they provide a really great solution for those things, and I don't know if there's any reason for other people to. I don't know who's going to try to compete with that. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Competition is overrated. I think back in the late 90s, I think it was, maybe early 2000s, maybe late 90s, everybody's saying, well, Apple only has 2% of the market share or 3%, whatever. And they had a great ad where they said, yeah, BMW has 3% of their market share too. Like, it doesn't matter. Just do what you do it well. If you build it, they will come. I mean, forget trying to compete with other people. Just compete with yourself. Be great. People will come.
Well, and I think that the hard part is that I think that people have kind of settled into, there's a handful of things that they're using related to how they watch distribution, and so they're not that people are watching it. They're using their TV and they're just using the built-in apps, or they're using an Apple TV, or they're using a couple other things. And I think that the companies that are trying to, even the Rokus and so on and so forth, I mean, they'll continue to have a vertical, but I think that that's going to be a pretty specific one. It's a little, I think that a lot of people that I know are either using their TV, their Apple TV, or some kind of version of a Chromecast. I really haven't seen anybody, when I talk to people, in the real world, I don't know of anybody using anything else. Next question.
Back to Miami Beach with Jeff Cohen. He goes, can you talk about how collaboration works in DaVinci Resolve with their Blackmagic Cloud functionality?
Jesse?
It works very, very well, and we've moved almost all of our post-production off to remote sites using Blackmagic Cloud. First thing we do is we build out a Mac Mini, and we send that to the editor. We build it out with the Resolve, a studio license, and an already loaded account to the cloud. We take all of our files. We build proxies, very, very light proxies, upload them to any given server. You can do this more simply through Blackmagic, but we haven't gotten there yet. They download the proxies, relink them to the projects. They do all the editing remotely on the cloud. Then we open up those projects over here, swap out proxies for the original 4K footage or 6K footage, and then export. It's a very, very intuitive workflow, and there's great communication tools with the notes that you can load up when you open the project, and all of our timelines are covered in markers with notes from the editors to us and from us to the editors. So far, nothing but great reviews for the cloud service they have.
Are you sending them an extra hard drive for that, or is it something that they're just using the internal drive that's within the Mac Minis?
It depends. If the project is large and we need to get a lot of files to them, we'll send them a 12 terabyte or whatever. But if we can get it all onto the Mac Mini when we send it to them, we usually send it on the Mac Mini. The problem with that is that they have to send it back if they want to unload that footage and load new footage on it. So we hew a little bit closer to the hard drives than we do to loading onto the Mac Minis.
And when you're syncing, now you have all that footage already there, but when you're syncing, can you define that they're only going to ever see proxies, like when you're uploading stuff, or is that how does that work? Like, so if they're go ahead.
There's a lot baked into that question. There's no one answer to that. But what we do is we build the proxies and have them relink those not as proxies, but as the actual footage that they're editing. So there's a lot of ATEM level native built H.264 files, which we don't consider proxies. We call those the ATEM native builds. Right. We build proxies of those and then have them use the proxies as the actual native build footage. Then we switch the native build out for the raw when we get back to our end.
Got it. Next question.
Next question comes from David Brady in New York, New York. He goes, I realize the Pixelmator has a direct export to motion projects. Has anyone played with this?
I have not played with that. I don't know what I would do with it. I don't know what. I guess it allows you to build up your layers, and so that if you want to build something out in Pixelmator, you can then export that out as just the layers, and then you can start animating them in motion. Go ahead, Jesse.
That is exactly what you do with it. So we've got a build in Pixelmator Pro. We've got 3 shapes on a white background. All you got to do is go up to File, Export, and then switch over to Motion Project, frame rate. You pick your frame rate and the duration. I'm going to cancel because I already did it. And then we go over to, you can load it up in Motion, and there you've got all of the items that you built ready for animation in a 10-second timeline at 30 frames per second.
That's great. I'm really curious to see what happens at the summit that happens next month. Where a lot of us are kind of, or is it later this month? Is it later this month or next month that the summit happens? There's a lot of concern in the community related to the fact that Apple did apps made by Apple and listed everything except for motion and compressor. So that was, like everyone was kind of like, what's going on? So we'll see. Hopefully the summit will clear up some of the clouds there. Next question.
Next up is Jeff Cohen from Miami Beach. He goes, has anyone used the transcription feature in Fairlight? How accurate is it on average?
Go, Jesse.
I am not sure if I've used the transcription feature in Fairlight. We use the DaVinci Resolve transcription all the time. Pretty much every video we export we deliver to clients now, we do a automatic transcription. DaVinci is very sensitive when it comes to automatic transcriptions. It is very context sensitive. And we've noticed that if the video is about Star Trek, it will crowbar more vocabulary to be things that match with Star Trek. If it's about Japanese ramen making, it'll crowbar the language to be more context sensitive to Japanese ramen. Like, it looks at the whole video and seems to understand a broader context than sentence by sentence, word by word. We've tested it against Adobe Premiere's auto-generate and YouTube's auto-generate, and Resolve is very far ahead of the others.
Next question.
Next up is John Foles from Sealands Grove, Pennsylvania. He goes, I have an NDI setup with about 10 or 11 inputs. What's the purpose of a discovery server? Should I be using it?
Guy?
Yeah, Discovery Server is like a directory, essentially. It's very lightweight. If you were to install it on a Windows machine, you'd see, if you open it up, that it's just saying listening and sources. So once you go into a source machine, let's say it's a Mac Mini, and you launch Access Manager and you enter in the discovery information, where that server is at, you point it to it, and now things just pop because there's not any of this MDNS directory lookup and taking a lag. It just pops. So the reason to use a discovery server is there's less multicast traffic going on. So at a school or something like that, where there's lots of things wanting to listen, you can just point it right to it and it'll pop and hit right to it. So I like to use a discovery server because everything is just so much faster and more reliable. So you just got to make sure that you go into each machine or device. Like some of my bird dog encoders will say, do you want to use a discovery server? And I say yes, and point it to that IP address. And then it's just super fast. And you don't have this thing of where's my stuff? It just pops up every single time. So yeah, once you get to that level of more than a couple devices, I like to use a discovery server.
Next question.
Next up is Jack Ruppel from Breckenridge, Colorado. He goes, when filming live at a conference, are you lighting or compensating for the indoor lighting?
Ryan?
Yeah, so Alex and Jeffrey can probably speak more to what's going on at office hours conferences, but just at kind of the typical technology conference or, a more corporate focused event that I'm at, one thing that I see people really screwing up, not so much is lighting, but rather kind of framing and audio. So when I see folks at their booth, and I see this all the time with their colleagues standing 10 or 15 feet away, filming them on an iPhone, and I know exactly where that's going. It's going to LinkedIn, and they're using the iPhone's microphone from 15 feet away, and they're going to post that, and there's a ton of background noise. So if there's one thing that somebody can do to really tighten that up, it's get a microphone on the actual speaker, and probably from a framing perspective, get way closer as well.
Jeffrey?
When I've done conferences, especially something where lighting is technically not involved, it's just basically a bunch of windows where lighting changes dramatically during the day. There's a lot of things that I will do to compensate for lighting. And the biggest thing is to try and get curtains on in those windows, especially if the windows are behind you. When it comes for a regular conference, if they change the lighting, a lot of the times there's not much you can do about it. But yeah, definitely have something that can change some iris, change some shutter, and be able to make changes if it becomes a drastic change.
Yeah, and I think that one of the questions is whether it's a conference or an expo. So at an expo, we're mostly just responding to whatever lighting we have there. I have taken, light sources in, whether they're camera mounted or we've actually taken, Airstar makes these little ones that look like little balloons. And we've actually used those which look great, but it's just really cumbersome. You have to look at the speed at which you can move around. And so we've kind of learned not to do that just because it was taking too long to get. Each segment looked better. It just took too long to get from segment to segment. A lot of these expos can get pretty busy, so we looked at that as well. When it comes to someone on stage, usually when we're doing something, we're lighting it to make that actually happen. So that's often the case. But I think that when we're going from place to place, we're usually just responding to what is there. I do think that at some point, expos will start to build themselves more ready for shooting. And I think that's somewhere in the future. But I think that right now we're still kind of adjusting to that. And it's just been good enough so far. Next question.
Next question, once again, from Jack Ruppel. Are you giving up on the 360 link camera? Limited your use?
Ryan?
I have two, one at home and one at the office, and one did recently die on me. So definitely experiencing some reliability issues there. But I replaced it and am not giving up on it yet. If it happens again, then I might make another different decision.
Guy?
I'm using one right now. I'm on the road, so I'm in this hotel that, I can zip around, and it's pretty cool for that kind of stuff. So it's better than packing around my big stuff, and it does the job. I mean, I'd like something with a larger sensor right now, but because if you've noticed, this lighting behind me has been drastically changing throughout the show because it's California and these are big windows, and I think it looks pretty good for $300. I mean, you can't argue. And then I'm using these cool aperture lights, the MT Pros with it. They're pretty fancy. So that's a setup, and it works pretty well for on the road.
Chris?
I'm using it too. I haven't bothered to set up my Blackmagic since I moved locations, and it's just lazy. But I hate this door, but I like this view. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that I still look at using them for multi-camera, like when we're trying to cover things. I think for my main camera, I did become pretty addicted to having at least a Super 35 sensor. So I'm using right now the EV10, and I think on the road I'll be still continuing to use the FX30. And I find that even when I'm in a hotel, I'm worse. What I thought would be, I was using the Insta360 link for hotels. I thought that I'd be okay with it. I found that at a hotel, I was far more sensitive to short depth of field than I was at home because there was all kinds of stuff behind me that would bother me. So, I mean, I think the Guy's looks great because it's a good looking hotel room, and it's not, I think that his works just fine. For me, I was in just a variety of hotel situations where I really wanted everything behind me to be out of focus. And so I just was in kind of cramped hotel rooms that just didn't really work. And so I did find that was kind of so now I've kind of, because of that, I've really moved to what I'm really interested in looking at is what happens with the Sony, whether we can get a good output from the Sony LR1, which is expensive, but it's a full frame sensor that's the size of a webcam, or just slightly bigger than a webcam. It's not shipping yet, but I could see that someday making it into my pack. Next question.
Next up is Nigel DeSalle from Austin, Texas. And he goes, Apple may buy the F1 TV rights. A reason for the Vision Pro headset?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Nigel talked about kind of some other potential use cases there, and I'm a little bit more intrigued by the use cases from a professional perspective to actually drive sales there, since the initial sale price is so high. But certainly when it comes to personal entertainment content, that's probably going to be right up there with the best of it.
Nigel? Oh, can't hear you. Oh, can't hear you, Nigel.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
We can.
I apologize. Most of us looked at the Vision Pro headset, and I think you've said it well, Alex. This is not for the mass market. This is early adopter, very early adopter stuff. But there may be some killer apps that emerge, or killer use cases that change that. And the F1 media has been very excited recently by the idea that Apple may pay $2 billion for the rights, the worldwide rights, which is, I think, almost double what they're currently getting to cover F1. And in the last couple of years, they've been putting in their helmets cams, and they're relatively little use in the broadcast. But if you subscribe to the service, you can actually watch that cam. And I have to tell you, it's a very interesting and exciting thought that you might be able to get in the car in the helmet of your favorite driver and watch them do a lap. And well, $3,500 is a lot of money. There are opportunities, I think, like that could really break through to test and prove and find an audience for that type of device. So would I go that far? I don't know, but that's the first thing I've heard where I thought, oh, now that got interesting.
Go, Jeffrey.
So all these streaming networks are starting to really buy up all the sports rights, so what does Apple have when it comes to sports? So F1 makes perfect sense right there. You have all the footballs going to like Paramount and YouTube, and then of course if you want to watch any pro wrestling, WWE style, you got to go over to Peacock. So it makes sense that they're just putting their hat into a sport so they can get in there. As for it being something on the Vision Pro, it'd be a great idea to have that from the cockpit look, but it's going to be a lot of work to do if they do it.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, Nigel, I'm curious, how much more do I have to pay so I can talk to the guy whose helmet I'm in? That'd be fun. Hey, nice turn. Maybe you should pass this guy. You think you want to win this race or what? I mean, I'm just thinking.
Go ahead, Nigel.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, actually, if you actually, they won't allow you to talk to anybody, Chris.
I'm out.
Especially you. They might let Nigel talk because he'd be soothing. He'd be like, you're doing so well.
I have to tell you, if you...
But Chris, they'd be like, no, not Chris.
You can listen to the race engineer and the driver talk throughout the race. And that is not for young children, I would tell you, but it's a very interesting experience.
Yeah, and it is we did some experimentation with this in the past, not at nearly the level that Apple's doing. Here's a shot of us installing a Teradek encoder with this was Mario Andretti has this 2-seater for the Indy So we were like, hey, let's put someone in the back seat and then we'll talk to them live. And so we built a grid in the Sonoma Raceway. And so we built a wireless grid, a wireless network so that he could go around. And we thought that there would be the person on the back would have a great conversation about how great it was, but mostly it was just them swearing and grunting as they like, all you heard was, oh, you know, as he started hitting all the corners. And so, but these are little GoPros. But I can imagine what we found that was interesting there was that what I'd really love to see is even a rectilinear, but a dual 180 that sat in the little head piece that sits right over top of where the racer is, where you might see just a little bit of their head in front of you, and then and if you got it just right, you might even see their steering wheel, which is basically a console, right? And then be able to see everything in 360. I think that could be really, you know, I think that would be really hard on the stomach, but probably better because the problem is they do move their head a little bit, and so what happens is when you get a lot of head movement in a VR goggles, it's disorienting. But if you get it onto something relatively stable, especially if you're able to stabilize that, and if they're going to spend $2 billion on the rights, I can imagine that they would spend a lot of money figuring out where to put stereo cameras on the car. Then you'd have to have an extra person in the pit who just goes out and wipes the bugs off of it every time it pulls over to do that. But I think that, you know, because the Apple headset is really driven towards people being seated, and the car is, you know, obviously mostly seated, I think it's a pretty interesting.
Hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, and I also think just even some of the stuff on the track of being able to put a camera where you couldn't stand. You know, we can put you in a camera where the cars are going by, where it would be, you know, very dangerous to stand in. I think that's a really interesting opportunity. So I think that Apple, you know, I think you're going to see Apple can just use the fact that $2 billion is then rolling off a couple, you know, rolling off a couple things on the outside of the stack. They can compete in a way that other broadcasters, you know, can't. What were you going to say, Chris?
I was going to say, if you haven't seen it yet, I started watching the Gran Turismo movie last night. It's really fun.
Is it fun?
It's great. Yeah. And you know, it's a true story, right?
Yeah, it's based on a true story. I don't think the movie is a true story. It is.
I have decided life is more exciting when I just erase the word "based" out of my vocabulary. I just glaze over that. It's a true story. It's totally true.
Yeah, exactly. Everything about the movie is true. You know, the funny thing is, most of the time you could be true, and it would be great. And you know, Hollywood screws it up. Next question.
Next question comes from Paul Walhus, who's based out of Austin, Texas. Right to repair movement gives consumers the right to repair their own electronic devices rather than being forced to rely on the manufacturer. What devices support this?
Go ahead, John.
Oh boy, is this a great topic. I think this all started with John Deere tractors, where the dealers had them all locked up and you had to go and use that. And it's moved to states. So several states have actually passed right to repair laws. And Louis Rossman, if you watch him on YouTube, this board repair guy, he's all about this, and he's spoken in front of several of the legislatures to get this passed. But remember the Apple stuff? If you wanted to fix your glass on your Apple, they'd send you 2 big Pelican cases. That was to appease the journalists because of the right to repair. It's a cluster.
There you go, Jesse.
If a company is bricking a device that you try to repair on your own, that is so completely unethical, it boggles the mind. But the right to repair is not necessarily a right to repair simply. So you can swap out parts of your iPhone and it won't brick the iPhone, but that doesn't mean it's easy to swap out the battery for the average user. And that's where things get really dicey.
Jeffrey?
And as being an IT person, having the ability to actually be able to do any type of repairs in-house is always welcome. I used to love HP and Dell because not only would they send you the parts, they online could go and you could actually find out how to take it apart, put it back together. When it comes to mobile devices, if somebody's got something, especially if they've got something that's got high security on it, having the ability to bring it in-house to repair it, that way, they know that there's no data that's going to be leaking out to the masses.
I swapped my battery on my laptop once. It was never quite the same, and I pretty much have given up on any kind of right to. They can give me a right to repair, but I won't repair it myself, and I would never want to hand off something that has that much personal information to somebody else. So I take really good care of my phone. If my phone breaks, I want a new one. Like I don't want to go back to the one that I had. And the idea that you'd send it to somebody and have them pull it apart. There's a reason that a lot of the Apple stuff is pretty touchy, is because there's a lot of security features in there. And so once you open it up, you can invalidate those. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Many years ago, I was helping a friend buy a laptop, and I recommended, look, I would buy the Apple RAM, but you could do this and save a few $100, and we could install the RAM for you. I broke her brand new computer by trying to put the RAM in. Super embarrassing. Super frustrating.
For desktops is one thing, but for anything that starts to have
Look at guy's face.
Yeah, I mean, for anything that for me that is, it is. These phones are not. They're built to be waterproof. They're built to be, tight and small and everything else. They're not built to be torn apart. And without a lot of specialized tools and someone who does it all the time. And so the idea that you're going to have a civilian open these things up and be able to do something reasonable, I think that Apple sent this out to make everybody happy. But if you order the equipment from Apple, you are crazy. Like, you are absolutely nuts. And I think that and Apple's letting you, like, here are the tools that we use. They're not dumbing them down. And I think that's a good idea, because it's just absolutely nuts to take an iPhone apart if you haven't done it like 100 times and trained and took all the courses and did all the things. It's just I don't understand. Yeah, go ahead, CJ.
The other thing that I'll mention as an ex-fruit stand person who used to have to repair these things, I can't stress the one thing that everybody overlooks is electrostatic discharge. Get the mat, get the little grounding bracelet. These transistors are so small that static electricity that's barely perceptible to a human is going to potentially wreck your logic board.
I've told this story before, but I used to work in mainframes. We'd wire mainframes up that you could walk into, and a guy was about to go in and just to tighten a screw. And I remember I was 18 years old, and I was like, I don't think you should do that. I think you should put a wristband on. And he was like, oh, I'm just tightening the screw. And a little spark just jumped off of his screwdriver and did $250,000 of damage in less than a second. So he didn't even get back to his desk. Like, literally, they walked him out of the building, and that was it. So anyway, next question.
Next question comes from Michael Marsh from San Anselmo. He's going, I'm performing digital archaeology. Is there a Mac app that will read floppy disks, or do you have to find an old machine?
No, you should be able to. If you get a USB to floppy disk, it should show up. I haven't done it recently, but I've done it as recently as like 4 or 5 years ago. We had to pull up a floppy, and it shows up as a USB device that's very small because it's just a floppy disk. But you can buy floppy disks. They'll have a USB interface, and they will. The last time I tried was, again, 5 or 6 years ago. They worked just fine. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm dying of curiosity. What was on a floppy 5 years ago that you needed to get?
There was some images that I found. It was mostly a curiosity on that I had a floppy disk, and I was like, I wonder what's on this.
You found a floppy in the bottom of a drawer?
I did. It was the bottom of a box, so that was, next question.
Next question comes from Lenny Nelson from San Antonio. I tend to avoid antivirus software as it usually is more of a problem than a solution. Policies are dictating that we use Crowdstrike antivirus on our Macs. Anyone have experience with this?
On a Mac and an antivirus? Sure. I don't know. I mean, who on a Mac uses antivirus software? Anyway, maybe that would be the case. If your company policy is to do that, then I would go ahead and do it. When in Rome, do as the Romans, but I don't understand how that would make any difference. Next question.
Next question comes from Philip Oler from Ketna, New York. Best AI application for video resolution improvement, including increasing resolution and improving compression and artifacts.
Well, okay, improving compression artifacts. John, real quick, we only got a couple seconds.
Yeah, I think wait for Adobe's Max coming later this month.
Yeah, I mean, I think the resolution stuff is. I was trying to think of the company that does the really good cleanup, but I can't think of it at the moment. But as far as cleaning up artifacts, it's really hard to do that well unless you've oversampled it. So you might want to think about that. I haven't seen a lot of good ways to actually do that. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some more stuff in Adobe Max. Let's go ahead and jump into the second hour. Welcome back to the second hour. And today we're going to be talking about bidding. So how do we bid projects? How do we avoid scope creep? How do we bid so that we can avoid scope creep? How do we put those things into that puzzle? And it's a really important thing. Some people will bid very quickly, that can be a challenge. So there's a couple different ways that we'll start to bid, and I'll be ready to throw this over to the team here as soon as they raise their hand. Let me know who to throw it to there. As far as, I can tell you for bidding, a lot of times I build a project to bid. So I build the whole thing out. It takes me a long time to get that done. It takes me I have to, think about the entire project, exactly how much it's going to cost. I draw all those things out before I actually build the bid. That's how I approach that process. And I think a lot of people will, and I think that there's a linkage here we'll talk about probably as we go through this, of the difference between the ability to, when we bid these projects out, having someone technical involved as well as the salesperson, and sometimes those are the same people, and that's when it works the best, but it takes the longest. But you have to kind of figure that out. Great, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah. So thanks, Alex. So as you mentioned, this is part of a overall series we're doing on project management. And actually, let me flip to see if I do this right. Hopefully that's showing up. This is some of the project management episodes coming up. Today we're actually covering, as you said, more the scoping, more the pricing rather, the pricing and bidding. It's really part of two parts, which is the scoping and costing, which is an important part. Today we're going to be covering more of the end of that, which is taking that cost and then looking at the market and your customer and saying, how do we price this? How do we price it to make a fair amount of money, reduce the risk, and then repeat that over and over again? And a lot of it is very specific to whatever business you're in. But we'll talk about some of the subjects, and we've got a great panel here that I'd like to just run through quickly, just so that you can get a sense of where we're all coming from, what our experience is. I'll go first, just because I'm on camera right now. So I'm Craig McFarland, CTO, co-founder of a company, software company. We've been around for about 20 years. We focus on really large IT transformations, data center consolidation, move to the cloud, all that sort of stuff. Our projects tend to be in the price range of 200,000 all the way up to 8 to 10 million. We do it for large global companies as well as banks, hospital chains, anybody with a fair amount of infrastructure. And obviously, each one of those customers is going to have their own culture, expectations, process, and all of that. So I'll be weaving in on some of those topics. So let's go around the horn to the other panelists. Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. I'm Mark Giuliani from Giuliani Associates, where I'm president of the company. We're a small architecture and engineering firm that works on projects that are anywhere from 200 square feet for a coffee kiosk to over 100,000, 200,000 square feet for vehicle maintenance like aircraft hangars and fleets. We do also design nice high-end products like airline lounges. So we have a wide spectrum of designs and do a lot of bidding.
And Ryan, you want to jump in?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Ryan Rademan here in Chicago, Illinois. I am focused on the construction industry. I do software projects for construction, digital transformation, similar to Craig. And so not only do I have to spend a lot of time estimating, scoping, bidding projects, but sometimes the software that we're implementing for construction companies is designed to help them do just that. So excited to be here today and continue the project management series.
Awesome. And CJ, are you reading, or are you part of the panel?
No, I'm part of the panel. I'm all good. So CJ Covell, I work for my family is in the building materials industry, so we produce exterior cladding with metal panels. I've done being a family business, I've done almost everything that you can do. Currently, I just moved from sales in the architectural and commercial division on large projects to moving over to looking after our supply chain and also our information systems. So I'm presented with a lot of bids from both construction companies, but also from technology companies. And then we have to sell too. So it's, it's sitting at the intersection.
Awesome. So good variety of views. Let me flip over to, promised just to have like 2 or 3 slides here, just so we're all on the same page. So obviously, this is pretty basic stuff. We're going to be talking about when you get requests for project services or whatnot, you go through an exercise of scoping to understand what's involved in it and where the variables are, putting that into some sort of cost, and then get into what we're talking about today, which is really the pricing of how do we then extend that to a price where we have a fair amount of margin. And if I go to the next slide, there we go. This is always a funny thing where you've all seen this.
There's so many versions of this. There should be you could almost do a whole book of all the versions of this process. There's one with a roller coaster, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just basically illustrating the fact that when you go from customer request, they have stuff in their head, and then they ask you, and they may not translate it all correctly, and then you take it, and it goes through this long chain of people. And unless you have a really deliberate process, you end up producing something or giving it back to the customer completely different from what they had in their head. So I think we've all seen variations of that.
And Craig, I'd chime in on that part when it comes to scoping. There's a term that you can kind of double click on inside of scoping, which is discovery. So discovery in consulting engagements and software projects or construction or events really all has to do with getting on the same page with the customer and the end user. So one element of it is kind of effective interviews with all the stakeholders, really trying to make sure you understand. Now, sometimes an RFP is produced, right? And that does attempt to help with discovery, right? By laying out what it is that the end user, the client is expecting when it comes to the results of the project. But another important part of discovery, even if you do get an RFP and trying to spend time with the decision makers and the people that are going to be part of the project, is building trust, because the better questions that one on the service provider is asking, and the more that you can kind of start to look for the edges that aren't necessarily defined so that you can get scope really tightened up, the better you're going to be able to estimate and ultimately bid on the project and hopefully win.
Oh, sorry, on mute. There we go. So let me jump through a couple of other quick topics, and then we can open up for questions. So as Ryan said, getting a handle on the scope and the cost, they kind of go hand in hand. And then also, if you're thinking about pricing, how much of a range of variation are you running into as you look at this project going forward? Is there a lot of things where the customer can create ad hoc issues? And do you have a way of managing that scope as it goes along, inserting a lot of assumptions around the scope such that if they go beyond that, you have something to reference. And then just general risks is a big issue on whether it's from the customer or third-party situations, whether the market, whatever it is. And then finally, just understanding the team capacity. A lot of times people will bid on many projects, but if they all got approved or accepted, you couldn't deliver all of those. So really understanding your team's capacity and then the confidence you have, especially if you have subcontractors involved. Then just a few high levels on the pricing factors themselves. Understand that, when you're building up the price on top of a cost basis, you want to make sure that you cover off on overhead and add some amount for contingency because you may add in lots of costs, but then there's unforeseen things. And so adding some percent, we use 10% for ourselves for contingency.
And one thing that you may want to think about as contingency is to kind of embed it into everything that you do as well. So you can decide that you're going to put a contingency at the end, or you can embed contingency into every element without necessarily having it line itemed. So you're just saying, I think that this could be a little bit more expensive than I think it is, and as I bid through that. And the reason for that is that a lot of financial teams within these groups will cut your contingency off. They'll just go, oh no, we're not going to put that on there, And so what we've learned to do over time is to not it's a calculate for the contingency, but calculate for it inside of. And if we can come back to a client and give them back that money, so most clients, some clients do, but most clients will not complain if you come in 10% less or 8% less than what you bid. so we'd rather give it back to them or come in a little under or provide more services inside of that budget because we had a little bit of contingency there to spend. So that's another thing to kind of think there. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, no,
go, Craig.
So
yeah,
I
was just going to say. So
jump in on the kind of estimating process, right? So some people have a really sophisticated estimating spreadsheet or a template that they want to kind of pull up and do a copy and paste on from their previous project. And I actually find that keeping it simple is better, and sometimes starting from complete scratch on that template can be the answer. And just to give a sense for what that sometimes includes, it's often kind of separated into two chunks. One is like the technical effort associated with doing the build if we're talking about software. So you've kind of got time on one dimension and resources on another. Of course, those resources tend to have different rates or cost drivers into the project, right? So especially if we're talking about onshore versus offshore, resources, or otherwise the other dimension, of course, is, how senior is the person that's required on the project and how much can we try to push down to the less expensive resources to keep the average kind of blended rate as low as possible for competitiveness, right? But when you break it into the technical and then the project management oriented bits, the key is getting down to the smallest estimatable unit of work. And so when Alex talks about those contingencies, what we look at is, okay, this is going to be a 26-week project, and we're going to have a weekly status call. And so that weekly status call is something that we want to estimate itself. That weekly call is going to be 1 hour times 4 resources times $250 per hour. It's $1,000 a week for that weekly status call. Now, if we think that this is a 26-week project, when we talk about this contingency, $26,000 probably is not the right price point there. You're probably going to want to, that's where you're going to take your extra 10% and go to a 29-week figure there for that project management element. And then the same thing would go for any technical elements is assume one more resource than it's going to be, assume one more week or 10% extra in terms of time that it's going to actually take, and then account for rate increases too, right? I mean, if these projects are long enough where the resources are going to get raises between the time that you start the project and finish the project, that's something that isn't often considered. And then along those same lines, is this client going to sign this document right now, or do we need to put an expiration date on this? Because if they take 12 months to sign, as can be the case sometimes in a software scenario, you might have a whole different cost structure at that point in time.
You may have a whole different company in that time, or a whole different, the business model, So I think that is, we definitely put time frames on a lot of the things that we do related to that because we to the point that, you don't know what you'll be doing. So you need to kind of create a point where they can't come back 4 months later or 6 months later and go, we still want to do that now in the same structure. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Craig, I'd be interested to see how you integrate risk management, insurance, lawsuits, all that kind of into these upcoming presentations.
Well, and I think that for us, I know that I'm speaking more for Pixel Core than for 090 because I'm not as close to the some of the stuff with 090. But with Pixel Core, we definitely, a lot of those things were calculated into our insurance, and we didn't really calculate, lawsuits or whatever. We did calculate the E&O insurance and so on and so forth that we had there was all calculated into our overhead. So when we made a calculation of how much something cost, everything from the rent and the power and the staff that isn't billable to, as well as the insurance was all kind of part of that, what it takes to make this work, what it takes to, some fraction thereof of that process. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So a lot of that we consider overhead, and we'll consider that'll get converted to a multiplier. So as you figure out the hours, if you're going to do it on an hourly basis or even convert that hourly basis to a lump sum, you then multiply it by that multiplier, which includes all your administration, your insurance, your rent, and all the things that are overhead.
Right. And it's, it's one of those things that it's a little heavier for, when you're doing a bid than someone who's just getting started, so you are going to be a little heavier because you have more overhead. But at the same time, you're bringing, the stability and the fact that you have all of that insurance. You have all those other things. So, there's a lot of stuff I know for Pixel Core, we had an enormous, because of the different facilities that we went into, we had an enormous amount of insurance. But that meant that we could bid on, the other thing we look at is that meant we could bid on things that only probably 1% of the production companies out there could bid on, because we were the ones that could deliver all of the things that were necessary for a large corporation to execute. So you have to remember that those are some of the things that kind of get, brought into that, that puzzle. Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, so just covering off on a bunch of the top end topics. One of the other pricing considerations is really time materials versus fixed. We do all fixed price projects. One of the interesting things about fixed fee that we discovered over the years is that if your time materials and the scope grows, it's good as far as your costs are covered, and if the client keeps asking for more, you don't have to worry about it as long as everyone is agreed. The problem is it puts you in a little bit of an adversarial position. If you want to make more money, you can only build more. And when we went to fixed fee, we discovered everyone on the project realizes ways to make the company more profitable is all about efficiency. And so unless you're fixed fee, it's really hard to have your team look at how do you save the end customer money? How do you become more efficient? So it's kind of an interesting artifact of that.
We've done a little bit of both. And I think that I find I prefer fixed fees, as much as I possibly can. But I've done a lot of both of those. I think you're right that with some clients and with some businesses, it's just impossible to do fixed fee because there's too many variables, and you have to. And a lot of times, what we'll do is define the project in very clear amounts. And this is again more Pixel Core than 090, but define. We would spend a lot of time defining those. So we tell the client what we're giving them, and then we say this is how much it is. So add-ons outside of that description was still they were time and materials. So we would say, well, another fixed fee. Like, so if they said, oh, we want another camera, sometimes we would, we would tell them, well, that's going to be another $3,000 for us to fly a camera and a camera operator and like all that stuff that's going to cost you that much more. So we would itemize things that were outside of the description. So it was a very detailed description of what we were giving them, but at the end it was one number. And part of that was also that I didn't want our clients to feel like every time they called me that there was an hourly clock that was going on that was going back to them, because then they called less, and so the fixed fee, because I want to have that, I want to be providing that service. I want to be giving them the feedback, because I mostly want them to not screw up the project by talking amongst themselves or talking to other people and coming up with haywired ideas about how this could actually work in a way that wasn't going to actually be doable. Because if they talked, from a production perspective, a lot of times if they talk to the agency too long, they'll either do something that is really dumbed down or really adventurous. And, having us in the conversation was really important so that we could, keep them away from the sharp edges. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So we found that the clients that have been doing this for a long time usually want a lump sum because they understand that it's much more efficient. There's much less of a billing hassle. There's a lot less copies of timesheets and things like that. But we've also found that there's a number of projects where we will do the first phase, which is the design phase, in basically as a lump sum, and then time and materials will be charged to the contract administration, which is as the project's being built, how many times do you have to come out to the job site, when do you have to represent the owner, when do you have to represent the contractor. So that sometimes we'll do both on one project.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that you get into, did you want to actually, Craig, did you have more things you wanted to show from that slide before we jump into questions? I don't know if you had.
I think we're good for questions. I see them building up.
Very good. Yeah. So all I was going to say is that I think that the other thing that we didn't really touch on is like dealing with triple bidding. Triple bidding is a pretty common thing in many industries where, they are required to get, 3 bids, from that process. Now, I admit that, we're a little bit more accepting about it. I think I know that I work for now is will play into that. In PixelCore, I would just stop bidding. I just go tell you to go somewhere else. Because I didn't want to, I was like, I don't want to have my relationship based on whether I can be the lowest bid, in that area, because I think that triple bidding is probably the thing that burns many good projects to the ground, most of the time, is because it is, it creates this price competitiveness, which makes sense in the CFO's office, but doesn't actually make sense in actually producing a result. And so we, especially at least in this industry, you end up with just making a lot of really penny wise, pound foolish decisions to make that actually work. So one of the things that we looked at, and this gets into things that you can do when you're bidding or things that you can do in the infrastructure overall. This gets into, like, for instance, for video production, owning equipment versus renting equipment. Renting equipment puts a floor on what you can do with your bid because you have a cost that you have to pass through, whereas you can be more flexible when you own a lot of the equipment and when you have a lot of staff. There's a lot of things that we could make actually happen there. Anyway, so let's go ahead and we'll jump into the first question. This comes from the QR code. This is George Ha in Talent, Oregon. And George asks, how do you encourage clients to sign your estimate? I need time to prepare. It's 3 weeks away, and I just received another request for the same week. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this. You definitely need to put expiration dates on proposals. And then the other important thing is building in lead time to the language on the proposal, right? The proposal or the contract needs to state that the project isn't going to start until 2 or 3 or 4 weeks after the signature, because naturally nobody's tending to be sitting there with a bench big enough to be able to start a project overnight. Any project that's kind of the right scale and that requires the right talent is definitely going to require lead time to get organized. If for nothing else, then to get a meeting on the calendar of the important people on the client side that need to be involved for, a proper kickoff, which is a really important element of any project if you want it to go right.
Craig?
Yeah, I think the scarcity of resources, knowing and letting them know, hey, the team is available if you want to get going with this, but there's a number of other things. And if those kick off, you'll need to wait an extra few weeks or whatever the time period is. So giving them a sense of urgency is important.
CJ?
There's also a lot of value in setting up some sort of automated system to do some of that follow-up for you. You don't want it to come out of left field and just say, hey, you've got a bid to sign. Hey, you've got a bid to sign. Hey, you've got a bid to sign. However, when you're in conversation with the client and you set the expectation that, hey, I've got this automated system, so once we get our proposal together, you're going to start seeing, whether it's DocuSign or whatever, you're going to start seeing a reminder that you have something to sign off on. It makes it like you're not being the annoyance. It's the system that's being the annoyance. So you don't sacrifice your your rapport because they think that you're over following up. But a lot of times the people who are in decision-making positions are just really busy. So having something that resurfaces it at the right time is really important.
You go, Mark.
So a lot of times there's other outside forces that are requiring you to get a contract signed before you move forward with the client. So insurance companies want to make sure there's a contract in place. The lawyers want to make sure contracts are in place. So everybody understands what's at stake here. What's the budget? What is the time consideration, the schedule? And so you really can use those concepts and those requirements to get the client to, move forward a step.
Next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And Roscoe asks, how do you comply with a list of all of your company's relevant assets so that you know what new projects to bid on? And or do you have a method for finding the types of projects that you have done profitably in the past? Ryan?
Yeah, so I'll kind of touch on the second part, right? Finding projects that you've done profitably in the past is the most important part of this whole kind of service provision game. One way to narrow that pond is to focus on a specific industry, right? So I mentioned that I do software implementations, and I personally and my team focuses only on the construction industry, and there are sub niches inside of that industry as well that one might focus on. You might focus just on architecture and engineering like Mark is in, just specialty contractors, just general contractors. You also want to be aware of a revenue band that you might focus on, right? We tend to focus only on companies that are north of 50 million in revenue and typically less than $1 billion in revenue, because as you start to shrink that pond, then the similarities from one project to the next tend to be extraordinarily tight. And so there's a quote that's in more than one good book, but one that I just read called How Clients Buy. And it said, if you are not the best at what you do, you should be shrinking your pond. And having defined those things, you can be pretty confident that you're the best at what you do. And so that's kind of what it's all about when it comes to finding profitable projects, is the repeatability and not being out there just asking yourself, like I was very early in my career, who needs a CRM, right? Anybody that wants one, we could do that for it. You could, but you're not going to probably be winning, and you're probably not going to be profitable.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, just to repeat a little bit, the value of doing that repetition of not just tracking what you're doing, but tracking the level of effort against the original estimate is critical, so that at the end of the project, or even after each phase, we'll look at if it fell in line, was it within a couple of percent, did something great happen, so you became super efficient and discovered something that you want to work into all future projects, or was there some other anomaly, some new technology that came in that complicated it or whatnot. And so tracking that along your project and saving it away, and then looking at it at the end and comparing it to the original estimate is really key for tuning that over and over again. For us, almost all of our projects come in within just a few percent because we're constantly looking at that loop.
Go ahead, TJ.
It's really important not to think so hard about the things you say yes to, but it's sometimes more important to figure out what you need to say no to, and try not to be all things to all people. At our company, we focus on a concept from Jim Collins, I think it was in Good to Great, called the hedgehog concept. And the things that we say yes to are going to be there at the intersection of what are we passionate about, what's going to make us money, and what are we the best in the world at. When we focus on the projects that fall within the intersection of the triple Venn diagram, then we find that bandwidth starts to be like bandwidth of the company, that is less of a concern than it might otherwise be. But definitely, you've got to know the limits of your people. You've got to be paying attention to what's the capacity of equipment, what's the capacity of your employees, what's going on in their lives outside of work externally, because sometimes all of those, especially in a smaller organization, all of those things can impact your ability to function at a high level and get that referral business for the next job, because that's ultimately what's going to drive you forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So it's interesting, in architecture and engineering, many times the RFP, the response to the RFP is based not solely on price, but mostly qualifications. And then they will pick the most qualified team and negotiate a price. At other times, you do have to submit a price, but it's two-phase. So when we look at an RFP, we'll try and determine whether or not we have the resources. And by that, I don't just mean the people, but have they done this type of project before? Have they designed this type of facility? Can we put together that team with those sub-consultants and engineers to really respond and be competitive? And in that case, you get to the next step, which is how do you identify those resources? Well, they've been identified because you didn't even go after the job if you didn't have them.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I love that there's a clip from we say it oftentimes internally. There's a clip from Joe versus the Volcano. If you've never seen it, it's a really good Tom Hanks movie, early Tom Hanks movie. But there's a shot where the guy's talking about it. He's talking on the phone. He's yelling at the guy, and he goes, "I know you can get the job, but can you do the job? I know you can get the job, but can you do the job?" You know, and he just keeps on repeating it over and over again. And it is so important is to know that you can, if you're going to send a bid out, that you are able, that you know that you could actually achieve that thing. And sometimes it doesn't mean you've done it before. For a lot of the streams that I've done in the last 10 years, no one's ever done before. Like no one's ever connected schools to the space station or, an underwater diver among sharks to a studio in LA. So people would say, well, how do you know that you've done it? I said, well, I've done all the other components. Like I've done all the components that are there and I understand how they work. I just haven't put them in that combination before. And so, but I was always very careful. If I had never done it and never had that, I was always very upfront, like, this is going to be new. We're all doing something new and we're going to be building something out. So, there's a lot of variance in what it might do. The other thing is that now, this also depends on the kind of client that you have. When we work with Hollywood clients, they kind of expect you to bid low and then just keep adding things to it. So it's time materials and they kind of expect that. They do not expect that in corporate. And so when we work with corporate clients, I will tend to hold a line. They'll say, I've got this idea coming in. How much does it cost? And I'll always give them the line I always give them, which is the same number. This is the same number as the last ones were, like that average number or whatever. I'm like, until you give me more information, it's this number. Now, we might be able to bring it down or might go up, but I'm not going to, that is the number I'm going to give you until I have the information I need to give you back a bid that's more accurate. Go ahead, Ryan.
You talked about projects that, have never been done before, projects that are kind of new and outside of your kind of typical range of confidence. And, a point to note here is that while you want to figure out what you're good at and stay in your lane and keep that lane as narrow as possible, focusing on only things that are easy and that a lot of people can do means that you're playing in a very commoditized space. In a very commoditized space, you tend to be able to push more offshore and you tend to find yourself in an environment that's much more competitive with much lower rates. So while you want to have a really narrow focus, you definitely want to be open to things that are slightly outside the realm of what a lot of people have experience with, because that is where margin exists, right? Margin exists where there isn't significant competition and where you are uniquely positioned or qualified.
One of the things, I don't know if it's still the case, but I know that when I was at ILM, one of the driving things was that for them to ILM had so many people that wanted to work for them and so many people that wanted them to work for them, that they really were in a place, because they had broken all this new ground, they could always keep on breaking new ground. And one of the things that they had as a requirement to take on a job, and again, I don't know if this is the case, this was 25 years ago, but a basis of the requirement was it had to require new technology development. So they had to be able to bill for new technology that they were going to develop for. So they'd always look for at every project, what's the new thing? What's the thing that we're adding to this process? And I think that it's really important. What Ryan's talking about is always looking for how to make it better. And so for me, the things that I'm always looking for as I bid on projects is what elements can we add that are going to be, new and interesting, that's going to break new ground. Also, how do we refine, if a client's coming back to us for the same thing, how do we either make that job more efficient or in a perfect, make it better, smoother, cleaner, looks better, or make it more efficient? And in a perfect world, a little bit of both. So what I'm always trying to do is, how do I give a little bit more quality for a little less money all the time? We don't always succeed at that, but we're always trying to find a way to make it, because we now know them. We now know what the things are. So how can we put things into place that make it us more efficient to at least give them a better thing? Now, if they keep on changing, the hard part is that clients will keep on changing things, and then you can't quite give them the efficiencies that you'd like to. Go ahead, Ryan.
And when it comes to running a business, your portfolio of projects, being balanced is important. What's perfect for us is if we've got a handful of projects that we're really at the tip of the spear on and that are really challenging our best people. But then if we've also got a series or a subset of our projects, ideally an even bigger subset that are just absolute slam dunks, right? 90-mile-an-hour strikes right down the middle that we know we can knock out. And so it's kind of a matter of those big rocks and the sand and the gravel that are filling things in to form a perfect portfolio. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've talked about a fair bit in the past, but is I think of my career, but definitely within the company that I work with and is the companies that I've worked in, as kind of a tank track. So this is what's paying all the bills right now. It's the one that's on the ground. There is usually a set of kinds of projects that I'm trying to get rid of. These were, this is the stuff I'm like trying to knock out, and then there's a set of projects that are taking me forward. Like that. This is going to take me to the next place that I want to be. And then there's, I can see that the one here, and these are the ones that I don't do anymore. And so like a tank track, it's just constantly turning for me. I'm always looking for what is the next thing. Now that oftentimes that's within the same company that I'm bidding for. It's not like I'm trying to find new companies, but I'm looking for the next thing that we want to do. And so we want a little bit of this, and we usually have a little bit of that. And you kind of, you want to do that much slower than you think that you should. I think that it's easy as entrepreneurs for us to think about how fast things should go, and usually it wants to go a lot slower than you think. Next question. It's from David Moeller, Arlington, Texas. David asks, when doing work on a gig basis for audio mixing or camera work, what methods of payment should one accept beyond merchant services, credit cards? Go ahead, CJ.
I'm a big fan of outsourcing that to something like a FreshBooks that has some light accounting software built in, but also it enables them to pay online. The number one thing that has gotten me paid faster on the gig work that I do outside of my day job is to make it easy for them to pay. If there's a link that they can click on that gets you paid, odds are they're going to do it. I get a little nervous about, I guess I don't like checks just because it's an extra step. It's not that instant gratification, but also, you got to get paid if you're going to stay in business and keep working. So make it easy.
I think it often depends on the scale, so I think in the sub $10,000 billing, I think that, something like FreshBooks makes sense. When you start getting over $10,000 of billing, you start not wanting to give up that percentage and they don't want to pay for it. So I think that figuring out direct bank transfers at that point, for most of the work that I do, and again, I mostly work with corporations, and so for me, there's a master service agreement. There's a process. There's a bunch of things. One of the things to think about there, and this is probably a little outside of the scope of this morning, but with new clients that come in, if they're a really large client, we have a master service agreement. We're a little flexible, but and again, I'm speaking more towards PixelCore because I had more control over it there than I do now. But with PixelCore, if you were a new client, we wanted a master service agreement and we wanted all the money up front for the first 3 projects. So we're not, we didn't start extending credit until we had a track record of how it was to work with you and whether that was and if we were working with someone in LA, typically we needed all the money up front 14 days in advance of a project. The problem with live is that once you do the job, there's nothing left to do. You don't have any leverage. It's the job's over, and so we were pretty brutal about that. Maybe we might have given up some work in that process, but the handful of times we gave credit to folks in Hollywood, we spent a lot of effort and time chasing it down. And I will say that if a client makes us chase down getting paid for if we feel like we're getting a runaround or getting delayed a lot, the chances of us doing more work for them becomes very low. Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, unless you have an accounts receivable department, do not work with anything that's going to make you chase money because it's not worth it. It's going to be a distraction from actually doing the work that you like to do.
Go ahead.
Nope.
All I was going to say is also, again, because we're talking about billing, we'll talk a little bit about collections. we try to do that as gently as possible. Like it is a casual, like, hey, how's it going? Da, 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 da. And, you know, by the way, let us know if we can do anything or if there's anything else we need to get done. Try to do it. At some point, we would just say, you know, we would tell accounting to go get them. Like, you know, like in PixelCore. I mean, oh, no, it was again different. But there was only probably a handful of times that we weren't able to kind of gently get paid. But there was a couple times where we just said, you know, let them loose, and they got paid. Like, you know, like that was, but then you're saying, I never want to work with that client again. You know, like that's when we got to the end of that, we would just say, okay, we're burning them.
The first step is like, hey, who's got the best relationship with these guys? Have the salesperson reach out, see if everything's okay. And then it's like, hey, you know that really nice lady that's in accounting? Have her call up, just check in, ask how things are going. And then you get the call from the CFO that's just very, very direct, very cold.
And I think that you really can tweak it. I will say, I know that we're talking about billing, but I guess we are billing people to some degree. We can just say, that is that is as important as your sales call, is how you call. Like if you send some angry email at 31 days on a 30-day invoice, you know, you're now only going to get hired when they need you. Like you very quickly got to, man, you better be good at what you do, to not have that, you know, coax along and let that drag out. If it's a client you care about, you know, you kind of have nice conversations about that. And we definitely have people or their spouses or other things that like to call up right at the very end and demand it. And I get, you know, and sometimes you're in a position where you need the money, but you can really burn up a relationship really quickly that way too. Next question. Sorry, from Douglas Carmichael. How do you account for cabling and other consumables in costing a project when specific requirements are vague? Do you use a certain fixed percentage in the cost breakdown? Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, so if you think about it, people's time is consumable. So once the time is gone, it's gone. And so for our projects, we're not using a lot of cabling, but you know, there's other things that are resources that are used in a project. And so if you're doing a project that's similar to a past one, Brian had a good data point of being an expert in your area. So if you're doing a project that you've done similar to those before and you keep track of what you've burned before, it's as important to keep track of the time that people put into it, as well as all the materials you use. So you can look back on it and say, oh, well, this job used this and that job used that much. And so we're estimating, because this one is somewhere in between, you can guesstimate a little bit better. But I would track those with any project you're doing, just like people's time.
Go ahead, TJ.
Yeah, in the manufacturing world, we've got scrap, right? You need X amount of material to set up a machine. You know that, you know, machine A is going to have a really low scrap percentage, but machine B with this particular type of product is going to have a higher percentage, and that's always baked into our number. And to echo what Craig said, the more that you do something, the more that you just have an intuition for what is that number. But very important to track everything that you're using on every job, so that way when you're pricing it, there are no surprises.
One of the things I learned from other folks, if we really get into a client that really wants, you know, a line item for everything, that, you know, they'll, I have to admit that we, again, 090 is a little bit different, but PixelCore definitely got into a little bit of a passive aggressive thing. Like, hey, if you're demanding line items, we would line item every cable, like $3 for every cable. Like we would just list, and it would be like 8 pages of line items. Like, if you really want to do this, like, this is how much it all is. This is the rental. This is what it would cost us to rent that piece, you know? And so, but I think that in general, we look at cabling, obviously most of the time we get to have back. And so we don't really think about that as a real cost. But there are places where you have to decide you're going to lose the cable. So, for instance, there's a great historical thing that you have to think about with bidding and with business in general, is burning the train. So when I think it was Carnegie, I believe, was an assistant at the Pennsylvania Railroad or whatever, there was this issue where the trains would break down on the track, and they would have to send an engineer out, and they'd have to fix it. And all that time, they left the train on the track, and then no one could use the track, and they were losing money on usage of the track on all the stuff that could be transported. And when the president of Pennsylvania Railroad was, I believe it was Pennsylvania Railroad, anyway, when he was out of town, a telegram came in and said, "Oh, we got a train down," and he got a telegram back from Carnegie that just said, "Burn the train," and he was like, "Sorry, I think I misunderstood your last telegram. It looked a lot like burn the train." He's like, "Yeah, burn the train. Just get it off the tracks. It costs too much money to keep it there." And we talk about that a lot. And when we think about this, because it affects bidding, is that I'll make decisions about cabling of how much is that cable cost versus the labor it takes for me to take it back down again. So we run things up into trusses. We run them on, like we do this thing, and we used to do this thing at CES where it was at a big booth, and we run all this fiber underneath it. When I bid it, I just bid to lose the fiber. Like I wasn't even going to wait, because I wasn't going to wait for that fiber to come back out again. Like it cost me too much money to wait for the fiber. So what we called burn the train. Like I just left it there and they can scrap it. And so when I put 2,000 feet of fiber into the space, knowing that I'm never getting it back, because because it's too expensive to wait. We do that with Ethernet cables. We do that with lots of other things where we send them all over trusses. It's going to take a day for that stuff to come down. I'm not going to keep anybody here. So those are the kind of things that you have to make decisions about when you're bidding, is what are you going to keep and what are you going to get rid of? Next question is from Roscoe Jones from Madison, Indiana. And Roscoe asks, how much do you invest in design of the bid presentation? Go ahead, Mark.
So we invest quite a bit, and I'll give you an example. If we're chasing a $100 million hangar that's design build with a contractor, that contractor is going to need a set of drawings to be able to bid the project. They're going to need to know where are the floor plans, what are the elevations. We have to help them develop a list of materials. So we'll work with them. It's usually about 60 days because there's a 30-day period for questions and answers, and there's a 30-day period to put together the proposal. So we'll work with them and the entire team going through once a week on a big Zoom call with all the plans in front of there, going through and itemizing every step it's going to take so that we can be as competitive as possible in that bid.
Go ahead, Ryan.
It's not just designing the bid presentation that has a cost to it. The entire pursuit has significant cost. So we talked about discovery. We talked about estimating. There's tends to be a lot of different touch points and meetings. And then maybe just one RFP response, maybe just one PowerPoint or keynote that we're delivering to walk them through the proposal, but sometimes it's a dozen. And so, this is a great question. And certainly those that are inexperienced can end up spending more pursuing a particular project than they ever stood to earn on that particular project. Occasionally, there's a good reason to do that and it's worth it. But if your organization is not focused on getting this balance right, it is going to be very hard to stay in business long.
Craig?
Yeah, I guess there's another aspect of this, which is really understanding and knowing the end customer. What's their culture? What are their expectations? What are their decision points? And if you've seen that theme throughout this, it's really understanding who they are and how they make decisions. We do work for large banks. It's a very different conversation than a local hospital chain. And so that brings into our presentation.
CJ?
I keep having to modify my response because it's always almost exactly what Craig said. Know your audience. Everybody's in sales. And if you are a cookie cutter with your bidding process or your bidding presentation, the customer is going to notice. If you're dealing with a smaller company that has a very horizontal org chart and you're getting to decision makers quickly and they're going to make decisions quickly, don't spend time interviewing the same amount of people that you would if you were dealing with 5 different departments or 5 different teams within a large organization. The other thing is know what you're up against. Know your competition. How are they going to bid? Who is bidding that kind of project? What do I have that's unique that they don't have? Those are all the factors that I'm constantly considering. Is that, like, how can I know my audience, tailor and adapt my presentation style to the person with whom I'm speaking, and making sure that I'm doing everything I can to set expectations every step of the way so that there are no surprises. The last thing that I do for a bid presentation is I do not allow words to come from my mouth unless I can directly relate them to how it benefits the person sitting across from me at the table. There's a great Zig Ziglar quote that I love that's everybody listens to the same radio station. It's WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
WIFM. Along with what CJ was talking about, an important part of discovery is alerting your competition to what's hidden in that project, because if you don't, you take the risk that they'll underbid you not knowing the complications of the project. So we always ask questions about things that we find that are very complicated about the project to telegraph to the rest of the competitors that, hey, you need to watch out for this, so carry it in the price.
I will admit that I often will allow the client to, I don't telegraph a lot of the complexities. One of the things that you have to be careful on a bit, because I do pretty detailed, oftentimes for larger projects, I'll do pretty detailed keynotes about this is how we're going to do the project. But I usually leave, it's very conceptual. It's not precise, like it's there, like this is what we're going to do. Now, I don't tell you how we're going to do that. And usually if you did it at the price that I gave it to you and you didn't understand how I was going to do it, you're going to take that asphalt at about 35 degree angle. And and when they pick somebody else, I'll look at them and I go, oh, that's going to be rough. I'm not trying to sell them. I'm just like, well, this one's going to be a lesson. And a lot of times my bids are designed to not create complexity, but really create a very customized solution for the client that is exactly what they need and exactly what they want. And most of the people that can underbid me are not going to do that. They're going to have a cookie cutter. This is how we do this, and this is what we do, and everything else. And so I know that if they try to adapt to anything that I'm doing, generally they're really going to take it hard, because what I'm doing generally is hard. I don't make it hard on purpose, but I make it customized, and I look for how do we tweak the most out of that project, and how do we make it the best for the client that's possible. And again, it's cost effective. I will admit that I don't pay attention to anybody else's bid or any other competition in what I do. I look at the client and I look at exactly what I think that they need and how to maximize that event for them. And I give them the best price I can give them for what they're asking for. And then I go, and we'll see how it goes. So go ahead, CJ.
There is an art to the way to ask questions. You can ask questions in such a way that makes the person on the other end of the table know that you care about the project and that you're trying to have their best interests at heart. But also there's a way to ask a question that displays some of the capabilities that you have, and then maybe makes them question, hey, the other guy didn't ask that question. Yeah. The other person didn't have that comment. I wonder if they're even thinking about all of that. Sows some doubt in the people that you're competing against. And there's also there's a way to indirectly question someone about something. Like I wouldn't, when I was selling Apple Care, I didn't give them the with fries with that at the end of the presentation and say, oh, and do you want Apple Care? Everybody says no. I started asking people, well, how are you backing up your computer? What do you mean backing up my computer? Oh, well, sometimes hard drives fail and you can not lose any data. And then if you have Apple Care, your hard drive replacement's free. Oh, what's Apple Care? And then all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing I will say is that I believe that probably a solid 25 to 30% of my what I've sold in the past 10 years was because of my keynote document. Like it was I saw, sometimes I'd see the other bids that went through and they were like Excel files with some pictures and a text description of what they were going to do. I build diagrams. Like, this is what it's going to look like. This is the layout. This is how the people are going to be laid out. This is what it's going to, this is what we're going to do here. These are the angles and all the other things. And I have almost no text on my documents. Just a little bit that you need to see. But as you flick through it, you get a sense that A, I know what I'm talking about. B, I know exactly what your project means. There's almost no setup slides. Like I will say, as someone who gets these slides, the 10 slides that tell people about the market and where you fit into the market. I don't care about those slides. Like I literally am like, okay. And I'm pretty aggressive about it. If you're in a meeting with me, I'm like, I got it. And I just want to get rid of all those slides that are in front. Because I just want to get to like, okay, what are you doing for me? This gets back into I have a project that I'm trying to solve and I just need you're wasting my time telling me about like all the other stuff there. I can look at that later or have somebody research you. But this gets back into the, I've said this, I think I said this yesterday, I say it over and over again, but just always remember with your action equals possibility is greater than circumstance. And your presentation should be dropping the circumstance, raising the possibility, either one or the other or both. And it will always occur when the possibility is great. Now, if it's not happening, it means that they have generally, they have a circumstance that you can't see. Like if someone isn't moving and you're giving them a great possibility, there's some circumstance that you can't see. And when you're in a meeting with them, you're trying to dig that out. And that might be that someone in the team has a personal relationship with another company. It might mean that they really are worried about this. Oh, how much is this going to cost over a year? It might mean that but you have to dig those things out over time to figure out what those circumstances are, because they're not always obvious. Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. Sorry, I'm very pattern-oriented. Many U.S. government contracts favor vendors that use people with disabilities for 75% of the work. Have you dealt with that in your projects? Go ahead, Ryan.
So there are kind of three categories here, right? MBE, DBE, WBE, and you're right, it is very common. Really, the way to deal with this is joint ventures. A lot of those organizations tend to be a little bit smaller and are thrilled to partner up in a joint venture with a bigger, more seasoned organization that might not have said designation.
Go ahead, Mark.
So all the federal projects have this. So basically what happens is the larger contractors will set up mentoring programs and bring in the smaller contractors that have one of these classifications and help them grow. And then they'll grow out of the program and they'll go and start the cycle over again with new contractors.
Yeah, and it's kind of the design. You may think that that's a manipulation of the system, but it's really a design is to give people an opportunity. Companies that have either disabilities or minorities or they're just smaller companies, it gets them a seat at the table where they get to understand how this all works and where it goes. And as Mark said, a lot of people grow out of that, and then you move on to the next one there. So I think that, and I know with PixelCore, when we were really small, we were definitely benefactors of some of those things where they were just looking for small businesses. You know, the other thing to note beyond disabilities is if you have a small business, a lot of times there's a requirement for a certain percentage of the contracts to go to small businesses. And so a big company like IBM or someone like that will come in and they're always looking for businesses that fulfill these requirements. And again, it's exactly the way the system is designed, is to take people who have smaller companies, minorities, disabilities, and give them an opportunity to be in the room where it happens, and let them continue to expand. And it doesn't mean that they have to be technically ready to do that yet. It's introducing them to that process. Next question is from Danny Grizzle in Longview, Texas. And Danny asks, follow-up question to the bidding jobs. Do you actively call clients? A management story I read told how Jack Eckerd, founder of the pharmacy chain, closed the bottom 5% performing stores every year. The word no seems essential in business. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of automatic things like that, of culling a certain percent, but it certainly speaks to highlighting the jobs that you lost money at or didn't go well, or the team just really had a hard time with because of the culture of the customer. So certainly tracking those, and at the end, flagging it as, yeah, if we have a choice, don't bother with them anymore. So I think it's more important just to be able to highlight where you might want to make a decision in the future.
Very good, Ryan.
If you have sufficient scale, right? If you have 100 or more active customers and you have ongoing contracts, meaning these are not all one-time projects, if both of those conditions are met, you absolutely should be culling 2 to 5% of your client base every single year, because if you have that wide of a distribution, inevitably there's a subset of those customers that aren't treating your people as well, or that aren't organized in such a way they're leading to the profitability that you need. And we all know the Pareto kind of principle around 20% of clients are causing 80% of the pain. So culling is critical if those two conditions are met.
Good, Mark.
So it really depends on the industry. I know as a small business in the architecture and engineering industry, we try and keep all the clients. We do keep track of what clients take how much handholding so that we can adjust for that accordingly and still have some profit at the end of the job. But we will watch that. In other industries like radio, we're constantly going through who are all the clients, because we have a lot more clients in radio. And how do we adjust for this so that we're not taking that 80% of that person's time and pointing it at 20% of the time. It's just not fair to the clients that are very good clients.
Good, CJ.
And there's no good way to fire a customer, so just start raising their price. And if they keep paying you more money, then maybe it starts to be worth the pain.
I tend to not fire customers as much as we just make sure that it's worth it for us. Like when we bid to them, we just want to make sure that that number makes sense for us if it's problematic. If they're problematic, I will tell you that some of the hardest customers to work with will be the most dedicated because no one else will work with them. So you have to, if you figure out a way. We've had a couple customers. This is more Pixel Core again. We had a couple customers that were they were hard. They were really hard. They were difficult. They were prickly. They were they whatever. But we figured out a way to give them the service that they needed. And they never went anywhere else. They called us for everything. They recommended us to other people because we had figured, so figuring that out, sometimes it's just it's a little bit of a puzzle that you have to kind of sort out. Go ahead, Mark.
Building long-term relationships is a lot less expensive than looking for new clients.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but we definitely had clients that were really difficult. That we couldn't figure it out, and it wasn't that we said, well, they're not workable. We were just like, I don't think we're the right match. But we would keep on increasing the price so that we could add more feature sets to what they were doing to make sure that it wasn't hitting us. And if they kept on paying it, we just kept on doing that until it got to a point where we had enough. Basically, it was, do we have enough staff to support that client? and are they paying enough for us to give them that staff to do that? Go ahead. Next question is from Matt Parker in Sarasota, Florida. How do you protect design decisions made in your bid? What type of equipment to install from being taken by the client as a shopping list for a competitor to do this job? Go ahead, Ryan.
Similar to the poaching protection question, there's only so much you can do. The language that you use is that this is privileged and confidential information contained in the proposal, and that it's to be viewed and used only by prospect ABC for the purposes of making this decision and is not to be shared. But it is also, definitely part of the risk associated with sharing a certain amount of detail in a proposal, not something you can protect yourself entirely from. And so I'd say the main thing is be proud of what it is that's very well possible that it, could be shared.
Go ahead, CJ.
There's something to genericize it as much as you can. Obviously, you want to make sure that people understand what they're paying for and what they're getting, but they don't necessarily need to know every nut and bolt, lump sum whenever possible.
Oftentimes, I put what appears to be a lot of detail into a project, but it leaves out the key pieces that if you don't put those in, none of it will work. And that way, if they take it somewhere else and they give it to somebody else, it turns out to be disastrous usually, because I've given them a combination, and without the four other pieces that are not in the deck, which you wouldn't see because there's so much detail there, that you wouldn't know that it was a problem until you were there. So there we go. Good conversation. Thanks to the team here, the production team. That's I do think it's interesting that there is a real strong crossover between construction and video production. It's a very there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of the things that we have and a lot of the same requirements. So thanks to the production group here for keeping this series going. I think it's going to be really great as we keep on going through the next year. Thanks to the panelists. Can't do this without you. We had a great panel here in the first hour and the second hour. Thanks to the producers for all the great questions. It started a little slow, and I was like, oh, maybe this will be a short one. And then everyone just kept on asking questions. We had to turn a couple back. Sorry about that. Go ahead and save those for the next Monday, because a lot of times this team is here on those Mondays. And so just bring those questions back in, and we'll address them then. You can ask these kinds of questions, especially on Monday, any Monday, to have that there if you see some of the group here that's there to answer your questions as well. So stay tuned for that. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that makes everything work. It's we're managing all the items here. We're trying to figure out how to develop the pipeline to make this actually work. And of course, an incredible team on the back end that is constantly making it happen day to day on the ground, or in the cloud, really, not really on the ground, but in the cloud, pulling this all together. Tlaloc Traversal, we traveled 65,000 miles, and that is 104,000 kilometers, and that is 516 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. There you go. That was good. There's so much to talk about. You could talk about this for like a couple hours. We do sometimes.
Kidding.
What do you say, Craig?
Yeah, no kidding. It's such a deep topic. We didn't even get to things about, cost plus or versus value or market based, or how to deal with negotiations. So lots of opportunity.
Yeah, we'll put those into future shows.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Chad. Or Craig,
good.
sorry.
It's good to have you. Welcome to your first weekday. I think this is the first weekday one you're on, CJ. It's really good to have you. It's good. All right, let's go back to our regularly scheduled program.